Again, my name is Joff Pedretti, and in addition to being a real estate agent here at Keller Williams, I've been an investor for just over 10 years. I did a first installment of this back in November, so if you were able to attend that, that's awesome. If you didn't attend that, no problem. We'll kind of overlap with some of the things we covered that night, but tonight we're going to spend most of our time really kind of getting into the spreadsheets. So if you are into that, that's awesome. And if you're not so into that, I apologize in advance, because there's going to be a lot of that involved too, and a lot of storytelling, because when it comes down to it, you know, there's always a story behind all these you know, different all these different transactions. So anyways, the class again is 10 years to $10,000 an hour. This is the deal by deal analysis. And now if oh, here we go. So start off with all the fun disclaimers. So I'm a licensed real estate agent who's bought and sold investment property both before and after getting my license. So I'll share those stories with you today. But I am not a legal professional. So if you need legal advice, please consult an attorney. I'm also not an accountant. So if you need accounting advice, please seek a CPA. And I'm not a financial advisor. So if you want somebody to help you put a portfolio together, please consult a financial planner. So the second disclaimer, real estate investing is a get rich slow game. That's why I put 10 years to 10K an hour, not 10 weeks, 10 months, or 10 days. It does take time. And at the same time, I feel that investment real estate can be really rewarding if you get involved in it. So I'm a huge proponent for home ownership, which I feel is real estate investing 101. And then obviously, if you can get a second property and then keep building from there, you can get even more benefits. The benefits are not always immediate. There's definitely, and most of these properties that I'll talk about tonight, not all, but most of the properties did not make money in the first year. So just kind of keep that in mind as well. And then I talk about the snowball effect. When you're first getting into investment real estate, it feels like a lot of work, because it definitely can be. The way I kind of, the analogy I use is that, you know, you're packing up that snowball, now you're putting it on the ground, you're starting to roll it, and it's work initially, but then as soon as you get it to the edge of the hill, it starts rolling down on its own, and it's starting to build. And some people are happy with just that one snowball, but you know, if you want to keep going, you build another snowball and you let that go. And eventually, if you have as many as you want going, they're building momentum on their own, and you no longer have to do the work. You can kind of just reap the rewards. So why am I doing this? So as I've told many people, investment real estate has changed my life. So this is my way of giving back and letting other people know about how it's positively impacted my life. And then my hope is that I can help you either get started, and if you have already started, that I can help you accelerate your progress. And by supporting you, I'm actually supporting the causes that are important to your life. For me, you know, initially when I got into investment real estate, it was just a matter of trying to supplement some lost income. But prior to doing real estate, I was in public education for 16 years. And then right about the time that I bought my first rental property, there were some things happening within the teaching profession where my take-home pay essentially went down about $5,000 a year. So essentially, I was just looking to supplement that. And then it grew much, much beyond that. So now, even though I don't teach anymore, I still work in the public schools as a coach. And now I actually have a scholarship that I give every year to students that maybe wouldn't have the opportunity to go to college otherwise. And that's a cause that's important to me. But from the conversations I've had with people who are in investment real estate, most of them have a cause that's near and dear to their heart. And that is, and so by helping them and helping you, I'm also helping all the causes there too. Barb, what's your question? Oh, sorry about that. I didn't realize. We good now? I just got to get back on here. Thanks for hanging in there. All right. So the big thing is, if you don't already know already, I tell people, you really got to figure out your big why. What do you want to do, with the extra, with that extra time? Because really what you're doing is you're trying to buy back time. Is it to spend time with your family? Is it to go places that be able to take time away that you have not had a chance to yet? And then next, determine your freedom number, because at a certain point, if you never determine that, if you never determine, like, here's the amount I would need to make in order to stop working or switch to working whenever I want, you'll just keep going. It really is something that can become addicting, and I've seen definitely investors where they just keep building. And it's like, well, what are you even building for now? It's almost just a habit. So, determine what that is. And like I said, for some people, maybe that's just one rental property. For some people, maybe it's having 100 rental units. It just depends on everything in between. So my journey in terms of the progress of how this all worked is, so 2011, I purchased a single family house, 911 Delaplaine Court. That house still exists, but it's not at that address anymore. What ended up happening is there was a developer who worked for a company that built high-rise apartments, owned half of the properties on that block already, and he fell asleep at the wheel for 2 really critical years. And during those 2 critical years, I purchased this property. And then he decided the next year, well, I want to buy the rest of the block and build an apartment complex here. And so me and my next door neighbor had by far the best 2 properties on the block. Or in terms of the houses, I should say, there was one really critical, there was like an abandoned church store that was on the corner of Park and Delaplaine. So that was the key piece. So once he got that under contract, then he was really aggressively trying to buy out the rest of us. So he did that. He paid me a dollar amount that I couldn't believe that he was willing to pay for that place. And with that, I 1031 exchanged into these 2 properties on East Mifflin that were a block apart from each other. So that was 4 years later in 2015. Then all that time I had been saving up for another rental property. So just 1 year later, I purchased East Main, which is just a couple blocks away from the Atwood, the heart of the Atwood neighborhood. And then 2017, I purchased 325 West Wilson. That was my first 3 unit. And that is pretty close to the Lake Loop. It's 3 blocks from the Capitol, really good location. And then you'll see that there was a big gap. So 2017 is when I got my real estate license, and I was my own first client. 325 West Wilson was my first property that I purchased as a real estate agent, and it was for myself. And when I first got my real estate license, my intention was that I was just going to buy rental properties for myself. I didn't plan to take on clients. However, once I bought that one of the coaches that I had known for several years had reached out and said, "Hey, Joff, I've been watching you do this for a while. Can you help me find a 2 unit?" Sure, absolutely. So now I help him get a rental property. I made another commission. And then people are saying, "Hey, Joff, do you only do rental properties, or can you also do single family house? Can you help me get a condo?" And as that school year progressed, I was making as much in commissions as I was making teaching. So essentially I had like a double salary year. which was enough for me to basically tell the school district that, hey, I'm going to finish out my contract year, but I'm not coming back next year. And but then I got so focused on the sales that I completely dropped the ball on investment property for quite some time. Fortunately for me, at the start of 2020, I decided that the real estate business was going well enough that I was going to hire some admin support. And additionally, I met a really great property manager that for the first time, I never thought I'd meet a property manager that I was like, oh, I can trust this person to operate my rental properties, but I did. And it was just kind of good timing. And I decided at the start of 2020 to hire both of those people. And with just the mental lift off of my brain from just, being able like, oh, now I have this person take care of this stuff and I have this person take care of this stuff. I was like, oh, now I can actually analyze some deals again. And lo and behold, here comes this 8-unit. And I hadn't purchased anything in a while. So I was able to make that purchase. And then later that year, I purchased Upham Street, which is just a little 2-unit by East High School. And then last spring, Valley Street, that is my first non-Madison rental property. That's an 8-unit in Cross Plains. So that was kind of the path of progress. And then I talked about this last time, and I won't spend a ton of time on this other than to say, obviously you want to be an investor. And out of these 4, the worst one, in my opinion, some might disagree, is the observer. Because the observer never buys anything, and so they never have a chance. At least the collector and the speculator, they at least get in the game and have a chance. And you'll see that based on how I analyzed properties early on, I definitely don't think I was an investor. I didn't really know what I was doing. And sometimes, I still, with as much as I know now, I still know that there's a lot more to know. Every step of the way, I'm always trying to learn more. You'll never figure it all out. And I think some people get in the mindset of like, well, I got to get it all figured out and find the slamming deal, and then I'm going to buy something. And sometimes, and most times I'd say that actually prevents you from getting into the game, and you end up as an observer, and then you don't get the benefits. So not going to get into this as much as I got last time, but essentially, as I mentioned before, home ownership has some benefits, but as a real estate investor, you get to essentially get those same benefits on steroids. So that's why I really recommend getting into it. And then of course the dollar per hour, which goes into the title, which is the only reason I'm even bringing it up this time. But essentially, as a teacher, when I bought my first rental property, that's about what I was making per year. You break it down hourly, that's $36 an hour. You go to that high income earner. Most people would say if you're making $200K a year, you are making good money. But so let's assume that person is working 40-hour weeks and still taking 4 vacation weeks, which most people I know that make anywhere near that are definitely working beyond 40-hour weeks and probably not taking 4 weeks of vacation, but that would be $104 an hour. So then you flip it to my progression as a real estate investor, how I bought that first rental property and I was making $7,000 a year. Well, I'm already up to $175 an hour. So that's really good. The only problem is $7,000 a year isn't enough to live on. So you have to keep building. So as you see, it kind of scales up. But when you get right here to, and this is hypothetical because this never quite happened. So this would be like if I managed all 5 rental properties by myself, I could have been making $80,000 a year. It would have been a part-time job though. However, right before that happened, that's when I hired the property manager. So essentially I'm making $20,000 less, but now I'm doing that whole, all those hours, 21 hours a month now turns into 10 hours a year. And that's just kind of the breakdown of what that looks like. And I went from, around $300 an hour to $6,000 an hour, just like that. And then of course the 10,000 hour, that's, you know, making over 6 figures and being able to do it in around, you know, 10 to 12 hours a year. And that thus the title of the class. So anyways. So real estate has a lot of benefits. And when we get into these spreadsheets, it's pretty heavily focused on the cash flow, which is definitely one reason to purchase rental property. You want it to cash flow. However, it's not the only reason. There's other benefits that will be kind of hinted on as we kind of go through those spreadsheets. So anyways, just keeping in mind that, you know, because some people get so focused on the cash flow, and the cash flow margins are definitely running tighter now than what they were, you know, 5 years ago or 10 years ago. There's still other reasons to buy it. At the same time, it should cash flow. That is actually one of my 2 rules, which is right here. The property must cash flow or have the ability to cash flow, and even with property management. So some people, they'll purchase it and they'll be like, okay, great, it doesn't cash flow now, but once I increase these rents, it will. And then they haven't factored in for the property management. So if you haven't factored in for the property management, you're not taking into account that maybe you will hate managing your own property, or you might not be good at managing your own property. At the time that I was managing property, I thought I was pretty good at it. And it wasn't until I hired a professional that I realized how average I was. And the only reason I was probably average at it is because I had literally thousands of interactions with many different personalities over my 16 years of teaching in public schools that really helped me navigate with some of these different personalities of different tenants. And then the additional thing is there can't be anything with the property, there can't be anything so wrong with the property that you'll quit, give up, or be forced to sell in the first 1 to 2 years. Because if something comes down the line 5 years from now, 10 years from now, you probably have enough equity in the property, or it's gone up enough in value that you have some multiple exit strategies to get out of that problem. And so what you're able to do, like, depends on your situation. So if somebody who's really handy and has a lot of experience in the trades, something has to go really wrong for that person because they might be able to fix it themselves and do it essentially at the cost of materials. On the flip side, someone with a lot of money reserve can probably do more as well. So I'll take you through one deal at one point where it was something I could do in I think it was year 8 that I did that one. There's no way I could have done this one in year 1 or even year 3 or 4, just because I was in a different financial position by that point. So it just depends. So a really great deal for one person might not be such a good deal for the next person. And so we are going to go to the spreadsheets here in a little bit. And what I say is, do as I say, not as I do. Investment real estate looks different on a spreadsheet than real life. And real life cannot be predicted on a spreadsheet. So there's things that are going to end up working out to be a little bit better than I expected going in. And there's other situations where it ended up working out to be not as good as I thought going in. But the final piece that you'll see is investment real estate's not rocket science. In fact, I'm almost embarrassed to show some of my earlier year spreadsheets, but I will, because it shows how little I was taking into account and how it still, worked out. At the same time, now when I'm working with people, I definitely take those considerations that I should have been looking at when I first started, and helping them get going. Because now that I know more, I've got to kind of teach more to that. So I'm going to get out of this, and then I'm going to try to navigate to a different tab, and let's see if I can shrink this too. Oh, there we go. Okay, so now I'm going to try to blow this up a little bit so it's a little bit easier to see. Let's try 125. Can you guys see that okay, or is that still really small? All right, I'll blow it up a little more. This is a decent spot. Any questions so far, or you guys just want to start rolling into this? Yeah.
I have one. In regards to when you first started your first property, did you live in that property for a little while, and then how did you?
No, so I bought, that's a good question. So basically, did I live in my first property? No, I bought my the first property I bought was a condo in 2004, which I moved into. And then essentially, you know, I grew up in an environment where saving, like there wasn't a lot of money to go around. And so saving was definitely a value instilled at an early age. So on a teaching salary, I mean, because when I bought that condo, I had like almost no cash reserve left. And yeah, on a teaching salary, let's see, it was about 7 years. Yeah, I saved up, I mean, you know, close to $50,000 in 7 years. You know, and that was enough for the down payment for that first place. So, but no, so I did not live in my first investment property. Yeah. No, I was under on the condo. You got to remember with the times, and I'll talk about that in a little bit, but yeah. So, okay, so here's what my spreadsheet looks like now. I'm just showing you this because when I go back to, you know, 2011, time travel back, you're gonna be like, what were you thinking? So these are just made up addresses, and you know, everything in here is just as an example. But essentially, I got the property address here, what the asking price is here, unit details. So just, you know, how many units? What's the bedroom, bathroom breakdown of those units? I've got the city assessment here. The city assessment doesn't matter that much, except for if it's substantially lower than the price that you're going to offer, you got to keep in mind that your property taxes are going to go up, and you should account for that on the next year. Now, here's the thing to keep in mind. I've purchased properties for 50% higher than assessed value. Does that mean your property taxes are going to go up 50%? No, but they are going to go up. So, you know, so just make sure that that's on your radar. And that's why I put that as that's a likely upcoming expense, because most likely, as you've seen in the residential, in the single family and condo market, typically people are buying well above the assessed value, and similar is happening in the rental property market as well. So then next is what's the total rent collected? And you can include other things as well. So like in downtown, potentially you're getting additional for parking. Depending on the way the building's laid out, maybe there's meter or like coin operated laundry. You can include those things if you'd like. I usually don't in my overall, and then, you know, if, and then I would include parking, but like usually laundry is not quite lucrative enough that I'll throw it in initially, and that ends up just being bonus money, but some people do count that as part of their analysis. So then that auto-populates the annual rent, and the vacancies auto-populated. I typically use a 3%. Last I looked it up, the Madison vacancy rate was around 2.5%. So essentially 3% is rounding up. Most landlords would tell you, well, I haven't had a vacancy in 10 years in this property, or I've never had a vacancy. And that's definitely possible to do. But what I would say is it is possible at some point you're going to do a renovation on that unit that's large enough scale that you're going to want nobody in there. And you're going to probably do it at a turnover. So if you do that, so if somebody moves out, and instead of already having a lease signed and somebody moving in, and usually it's strategic. So for example, if you think, hey, the rents are currently $1,200 a month, but if I renovated the kitchen, I bet I could get $1,500 a month. Okay, well, in addition to the expense for doing that renovation, you also have to keep in mind that it's probably going to, even if you have everything lined up well in advance, you're going to have 2 weeks for the projects to happen. Then once it happens, now you can actually take the finished photos, which are going to draw people in to rent at that higher amount, and then you can get at least, you're going to have it vacant for probably at least 2 months. So, or excuse me, for at least a month. So if you don't have another vacancy again for 5 years, 10 years, well, yeah, then over that whole course, that averaged out to 3%. So I think it's still good to account for some vacancy. And of course, if you just plan to never renovate it, and some landlords definitely do not, you essentially you just consider that your end of year vacancy, non-vacancy bonus. Year one expenses. So that's just how much money you plan to plug into the property in the first year. And the reason I count for that is I count that as part of my return on investment, because your down payment is part of your return on investment, but how much you plan to put into the property in that first year is part of that. Separate from maintenance, which I'll get to in a little bit. So the rest of this, the down payment is auto-populating based off of whatever you plan to put as your down payment, which is going to depend on your lender. 20 to 25% down for an investment property is your most typical. And then how many years are you going to amortize it over? So most people are used to a 30-year fixed. However, once you get into commercial lending, a 25-year amortization is more common, although you can negotiate to have a little bit longer. All of mine are on 30, but my lender tells me all the time, just that's not typical, most people, but I've just done so many loans with him that way that he doesn't care. And then that figures out the monthly payment. So that's based off of the years you're amortizing, the interest rate, and then of course the purchase, the loan amount. So then you got to account for your expenses, property taxes, insurance, and then there's annual maintenance, which can vary widely. If you buy let's say you buy a duplex that was built in 2005, that's going to look very different than a 4-unit built in the 1960s, which is going to look very different than a 2-flat in downtown Madison that was built in 1910. So you just have to kind of, as you look at the building, you just have to kind of use your best gauge of, okay, how much money am I going to have to probably plug into this property on any given year? Property management fee is based off of whatever percentage you put in here. So that's what's kind of calculating in here. And then of course your utility expenses, electric, gas, water, sewer. Do you pay it or does the tenant pay it? And then other, that could be snow removal. That could be, if you have like a 8-unit where they just have a dumpster, then you're paying a garbage fee. And then this is where, okay, now we're trying to, as best we can, because it's not perfect, compare compare apples to apples the best we can. Okay, so now we're looking at, if you hired property management and you had that expense, what's the cash flow? And then what's the cash flow if you self-managed it? And then what's your cash on cash return if you had a property management versus self-management? And like I said, so for example, out of these three, the second one, unless we thought it was under rented and the rents could be increased, I would be advising that buyer not to purchase that property. Now, if we thought, oh, these rents are way low, we can get that up, on the next rent cycle. Well, yeah, then maybe that makes, more sense. And then we've got GRM, which stands for gross rent multiplier. That's just a really simple equation where it's basically the asking price or purchase price divided by the annual rent. Very simple, but that is a formula. I rarely use it now, but when I was in my first, probably 5-6 years of investing, that was the formula I did to see if I was even going to put it into the spreadsheet. So, so like if I saw it was a gross rent multiplier of say 15, well, this isn't even close. Now, let's say I thought it was under rented. Okay, now I'll plug it in with the annual rent that I thought it could be. Oh, that drops it down to a 13. No, that's still not good enough for me. And I wouldn't even bother taking the time to put it in the spreadsheet. So gross rent multiplier is a very easy equation but then that makes it less, less of a good measuring stick of whether or not you should buy the property. Then the number of units, which gives you the price per door, which is not that that matters a ton, but sometimes that's just good to know. Like, okay, I'm paying about 100K a door. I'm paying close to 200K a door. And then just for the heck of it, if this thing was all paid off someday, what would the cash flow be then? How would a cash buyer look at this? And then the cap rate. So the cap rate is a more complex version of the gross rent multiplier because now it is factoring in expenses. So I'll just kind of tap on one. So it's the same thing. It's the asking price divided by the annual, or it's factoring the asking price versus the annual rent, but now it's also subtracting all the expenses. What I found though is, when you're looking at cap rates, you got to make sure you see how they calculated that, because I've seen different investors calculate it different ways. So anyways, but I would never, and this is what some people will ask me, well, what's the cap rate you need to see to buy a place? Or what's the cash on cash percentage you need to see to buy a place? Well, I mean, honestly, it depends. I really look at what can I make it, not what is it right now. That's kind of the determining factor, because if it's completely turnkey ready to go, it probably isn't going to be that great of a setup for you, unless of course, and we'll go to my first one, unless of course it was 2011. So 2011, this was my spreadsheet, and in fact this was the original spreadsheet. I just had purchase price, rent, property. Well, that's the assessment. It's all thrown off because at one point I was like, oh, you'll see I analyzed a ton of properties because I didn't know what I was doing. I was not working with an agent, definitely should have been. And so I didn't know what a gross rent multiplier was at the time. So the only way I could analyze a property is if I just ran it all the way through. And so the bad of that is, if I hired an agent, this process would have gone a lot faster, and I probably would have made more money, because in all the time I wasted, that was months of cash flow that I didn't get. On the good side, as I learned by doing, thus learned a lot in the process. But essentially, this property here, 911 Delaplaine, is one of the first property. I think it was the second door I went inside, and actually, and this just popped in my head right now. So because I wasn't working with an agent, I would call the list agent every time. And for some reason, I don't know why this popped in my head, I didn't meet this list agent because the property happened to be vacant. And he just said, oh yeah, the codes, whatever, 1, 2, 3, 4, just go on in and check it out. Because there weren't tenants at the time, but they did have a lease that was going to start. So anyways, I checked this property out. They bought it in 2008, when it was intended to be a flip. They gutted it to the studs. Everything was brand new except for the furnace, which was 10 years old, but still new AC. The floors had just been refinished. New windows, new doors, and awesome location. It was across the street from St. Mary's Hospital.
This is Ellen's son, Joff.
What's that?
Ellen's son, Joff, is giving a talk.
Oh, hey Rose, you're on audio. So, anyways, the breakdown, they were asking $239,900. Oh, for some reason I cared about what the assessed value was for the last 2 years. I'm not sure why. I also cared about what the Zestimate was. I don't know why. That's the last time you're going to see it on one of these. I have the property tax, the rent. I don't know. I must have Googled somewhere that you should calculate for some kind of worst case scenario of what if you only get 70% of the rent. I don't know why I had that. I mean, I literally just looked at this again for the first time 2 months ago as I was prepping for this. So I don't know Mortgage payment, that was based off of a 4.5% interest rate, which is where it was at that time. Yeah, I don't know. Other, like you'll see, no expenses. Apparently you can have a rental property, have no expenses. Apparently I thought that was going to be possible. And so you'll see that I have a cash flow of, of 8,000 and change. And essentially, or wait, no, that was on this one here. I don't even know. But essentially I really like this property, and I spent the whole summer trying to find a better deal than that. That's essentially what I did. So I saw a lot more properties. I went into a lot of these, which is also, you don't need to. I mean, if it makes sense on the spreadsheet, now I'm pretty much going to a property just to like assess where my offer is going to be, not if I'm going to offer. It's like, what is my offer going to be when I'm going to look at something? And so, anyways, bad timing for this agent, because right about this time, I came across Tom Christensen, who ended up later on, not for this transaction, but later on, he ended up becoming my my real estate agent. And he had several properties of his own that he was trying to sell, and they were, I thought, pretty good deals, better than Delaplaine, but they were also a little bit higher in price. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna have to save up for like 2 more months. You remember 2011, you didn't have to worry about stuff selling. Everybody was telling me, Joff, don't buy, are you crazy? Your condo's already lost $40,000 in value. Now you're gonna go buy a second property? And I was like, well, yeah, but if it makes me like $5,000 more a year, like it doesn't matter if it's losing value. Like I really think, and I didn't think it was gonna keep going that way. So at least not forever. So I didn't even care if it went down for a couple more years. But anyways, and you'll see this one again, but 1214 East Mifflin, I was like, this is the property. I want this property. I'm going to save up for it, and I'm going to buy this property. And fortunately for me, because knowing what I didn't know too much about 1214 East Mifflin at the time. This agent at Delaplaine reached out to me, and he said, hey, we got an offer. You've been asking me questions about this for months. Do you want to get in on it? And I was like, actually, I got another property that's better than that, yada, yada, yada. And then he says, well, just make an offer. And I was like, oh, he's got nothing. He's just, making this up. So I told him, so then as you see down here somewhere, yeah, I offered 205, and here's how the numbers looked at 205. And then they countered. And initially, I was prepared to go as high as 220. But like now knowing this and knowing that I actually had another property I wanted, they came down to 218. I countered back at 210. They accepted that. The interest rate ended up being a little bit higher by the time I locked. So I got a 4.625. So here's how that first one looked. But I don't know, this is a situation that you probably couldn't be replicated again, because I think it's highly unlikely, at least in the foreseeable future, we're going to be at a spot where home prices are declining and people are not purchasing property. But anyways, this one ended up being really good. I remember thinking, even just 2-3 years later, oh man, like I'll probably never get another deal as good as Delaplaine again. The reality is I'll probably never have another turnkey as good as Delaplaine again. But I've had better deals since then. The other thing too, some people ask about the 1% rule. Is that something that you guys have heard of before? 1% rule. So that's like, you should buy a property where the rent is 1% or higher of the purchase price. You'll see that as good as a deal of this was, this still wasn't. It was pretty close, but it still wasn't 1% rule. So 1% rule obviously is not a thing for me. All right, any questions on that one? All right, so then we're moving on to Mifflin. So as I said in the beginning, now I've got to sell this property. This guy just gave me, I just bought it for $210 in 2011, and now it's 2014, and it's from the accepted offer to closing is 12 months, because it was a unique deal the way he had it structured. But he's the 290. So he's giving me 290 for something that just a few years ago I purchased at 210. So 80K profit, and I had a down payment, initial down payment of about 40K. Plus, I've had principal pay down during that time. So I've got a good chunk of change of equity to deal with, probably like 130K as a down payment. And then in order to not pay cap gains, I have to purchase something at least at 290. But I could maximize if I did better. So now you'll see is now I'm working with an agent. There's a lot fewer things on this list. And now I'm counting for all the things, now even for some of the properties, I'm counting for repairs and other expenses and those types of things. So I ended up actually buying from Tom directly on this, and he was a smart cookie. He was trying to sell his properties during that, that whole time that home prices were going down. And if remember I said keep 1214 East Mifflin in mind. Well, guess what? He packaged it up with 1307 East Mifflin, and at a combined total at just a budget, like, I almost sometimes wonder if he just like went on a spreadsheet and was like, okay, here's this package deal. How can I make mine just slightly better and make it at a price where it's almost exactly a 20% down payment from the equity that he has to work with. I don't know, but it worked. It worked. I bought directly from him, and it worked out great. Now, here's the difference. I thought this was going to be just like Delaplaine all over again. And I realized during the inspection period, it was not going to be like 9/11 Delaplaine all over again. These were not newly renovated. They had a lot more deferred maintenance. I had to put $10,000 into each property separately, so 20 grand total in the first 12 months. One of the places, like half the windows were literally fused closed, like would not open. So I replaced all the windows, and the other ones weren't awesome. So I replaced all the windows in that property. At another one, there was like a flat roof issue, so it wasn't the whole roof, but the flat roof, there was an issue with that. The deck looked like it was going to fall apart. He didn't think the deck, he's like, oh, I can't believe you're asking for that on inspection. And he even, like, we were on the deck and he jumped up on it, like hit it. And like, I was like this, cause like, I mean, just knowing what I know, and I ran it by a structural engineer, I was just like, when they replaced that deck, probably just 3 months after, that whole situation, just by them taking off the potted plants that were on it, 2 of the boards popped during that time. So anyways, yeah, it was rough. But anyways, so I'm putting more money into them. I'm definitely getting more phone calls than what I was getting on Delaplaine. So it was more work. But the cash flow was really good. I mean, it wasn't quite this good in reality because I'm still not accounting for certain things. But, and when I sold Delaplaine, so when I bought it, it was initial cash flow of about $7,000. When I did factor in some of those things that I forgot to factor in when I bought the place in the beginning. But I increased the rents. The next year, I raised the rents to $2,200. I refinanced my loan, so I had a lower mortgage payment. My property tax went down because I bought so far below the city assessed that my property tax went down. And because of all those renovations, I was eventually able to prove to my insurance company that the plumbing had been all replaced in, 2010 or 2008, and the electrical had all been replaced. And I was able to prove enough stuff that they dropped my insurance pretty substantially. So all things combined, I sold that one. It was making about $11K a year, and now I'm buying into a property that's making over $20K a year, or 2 properties. So, yeah, that's how that all worked. And, the 2 lessons learned there is, one, you can't always compare it to, you can't compare you can't compare to a great deal. Like I said, I was like, oh man, this still might not be as good as Delaplaine. And then you got to stretch your comfort zone in a seller's market. So the market was, let's see here. I think this was 2015. I mean, the market was definitely moving at a better pace at this point. When I was putting in offers, I was competing, and it was definitely more interesting. So Any questions about that whole phase of the game? All right. So now East Main, so you see there's a lot more properties here again, and a couple reasons for it. Now the market's even picking up more. I'm missing out on offers. Like now I'm writing offers and they're getting rejected. They're going with somebody else. Because even on this one, back to the Mifflin properties, I only wrote one offer and it got accepted, and that was it. So it was really quick. But some of these, I wrote on some of these. Just because I didn't go aggressive enough, and that's fine. But you kind of work your way down. There's this East Main one. This is Atwood area. It was a 2-unit, so 2 bedrooms above, 2 bedrooms below, 1 bathroom each unit. Older property, just like the Mifflin properties. It'd been managed by a larger management company here in town for a long time. So again, a lot of deferred maintenance. I knew going into it. Oh, on top of it, and I didn't know what knob and tube electrical was at the time, but I definitely knew after this. And on top of it, I had, so going back to the Mifflin ones, 3 of the 4 units, fine tenants, just fine. Maybe not awesome, though one of them was, but they were fine. One of the groups of tenants was rough. They had lived there 15 years. They thought they owned the place. Self-proclaimed hippies. That's what they were like, oh, we're just a couple old hippies, but they smoked in the unit. They were not easy to deal with. I'd be doing something at the property. They'd be singing my praises. I would do some other project at the property and they were yelling at me. So it was, that was interesting. Definitely different than my 9/11 Delaplaine experience, but I moved those guys out, put another, actually, so this was a year 2 expense. I put another $10,000 into the property. And now that's the most, probably out of all my downtown area, that's the most desirable place that I rent out now. It rents at the highest out of any of them because I really, did a lot to make it better. But anyways, 1968 East Main. Now I've got difficult tenants again. Right before closing, there was an eviction notice on. So I was like, oh God, what am I getting myself into? I ended up having to essentially doing a cash for keys, where essentially it was like, hey, you know what? This isn't working out. If you move out by the end of the month, I'll give you your security deposit back. Just get out of here. And they were like, hey, we're good with that. And they moved out. I put money into that place. And remember, it had not been that long since the East Mifflin ones. So it's just like, oh man, how many more years can I just spend all this time, energy, effort into improving these units? But you'll see what happened is essentially the way this broke down on a spreadsheet is, here's what they were asking was 230. And I was able to negotiate it down to about 215. And then here's the other great thing. It shows 20% on here, but I was actually able to negotiate with the lender, and they were like, well, you've already got a couple properties. You've been doing this for, at that point, 4 or 5 years. We'll let you do this at 15% down. Okay, great. Well, now I'm only putting $32K in plus closing costs. But the way it all shook out is the first year cash flow was only $4,300, but after putting all that money in, it was going to be at $11,000. Now, what I didn't account for is how much all those renovations were going to cost. I was just like, well, I've got the money to do it. Plus, now I only have to put 15% down, so now I've really got some extra money to do it. But that's kind of what I learned in this process is like, if you really want to make a deal now, you have to almost create it. Like, it's not going to be as easy as 9/11 Delaplaine, where I can just buy it turnkey and it's making, $7,000 right out of the gates. And then even the East Mifflin properties, they were making decent money right out of the gates, and I was able to make it even a little bit better than that. But now I'm finding, okay, year 1, so cash flow, $4,300, but I spent at least $15,000 in the first year on that one. So I took a big loss, but now I've got a property that's making about 10 grand. Well, not now because now it's property management as well, but and the rent's gone up. I'll show you the updated spreadsheet in a little bit. But it was because of that 15% down that I now knew I could purchase a property every year. That's when I got my real estate license. So again, going to West Wilson, now I've got my real estate license. I'm going into these properties oftentimes just by myself. And, you know, here's some different properties I looked at, considered, and then here were the ones that I wrote on. So I wrote on this one, but I was too slow and I was not a very experienced agent at the time. So I was, it actually had just come back onto the market. And so I was like, oh, this is great. I'll swoop in. I saw it, ran the numbers, decided I was going to write an offer, and sent the offer only to get an email right back. Oh, sorry, we just accepted one like an hour ago. You should have told me you were writing this. I was like, oh, okay. Never made that mistake again. So, but that was like a rookie agent mistake. And I was like, okay, I'm not doing that again. So on this Vilas one, I'd been on the market for a while. I was negotiating for a lower price. It was that weird time in the market where by me making an offer, that got somebody else to offer, and their offer was better than mine. So of course they took that offer. So I didn't get that one either. And then here comes 325 West Wilson. This was their initial price. They lowered it to 530. Like I was just about, because I'm really big about, if you think someone's going to price reduce, just like go in at the price that you think they're going to reduce to, and they'll probably just take it and not even counter you. Well, I tried to do that, and they price reduced literally the day that I planned to make my offer. But I was planning on going even lower than what they did. We ended up settling just below their reduced price, 525. And essentially the way I was looking at this was, hey, they're currently under renting it. They're only getting $4,000 for it's a 3-bed, and a 2-bed, 3 blocks away from the Capitol Square. I was really confident that I could get these rents up to $1,650 a piece and $1,200 for the 2-bedroom up top. And the other thing that really attracted to me to this one is that it didn't need a ton of work. Most of the properties I was looking at, I was like, oh my God, this is gonna be another East Mifflin or East Main all over again. I'm gonna have to spend a ton of time and money, and I just didn't really want to do that. And so, so with this, so this first year projection, and then, my criteria at the time, pretty much, for me to buy something, I either wanted it to make $10,000 in the first year, or if I increase the rents on year 2, the second rent cycle, it'd make $10,000. Now that's not an awesome criteria, and the reason I'll tell you why is because even if you look at this one that I wrote on East Wash, it wasn't going to make 10 grand in the first year, but in year 2 it was going to be up to 13 grand. But the price point was only 350, and now you're looking at this one. This one's almost $200,000 more. It should do better than that. So out of all the deals that I've ever done, this is probably, in the grand scheme of things, the weakest one that I did. And so with the lessons learned in this one, in a seller's market, you got to go fast and you got to communicate. And then if you play it safe, you'll get an average outcome. If you look at how much cash flow I've gotten in the time that I've owned it almost 5 years now. And you look at, and then this one also had these weird things happen that just end up being expensive. So like last year, out of nowhere, because I was planning on selling this one last spring, and then just 1031 exchanging it. And because when you put property management into effect on this one, now it takes a bigger bite out of this than some of the properties where I have less rents coming in. So it's even lower in terms of how much money it's making. So I'm just like, this one doesn't really make sense anymore, and it's in a super desirable area. Someone's going to want this. It's got Monona, Lakeview out the back of the house. So if you're in the back rooms, someone's going to want this. And then right about the time I was just about to get it on, my property manager calls me up and he's like, Joff, I got really bad news for you. The back deck, which is very high, is rotting, and it definitely needs to get replaced. And I was like, oh God. So if you remember, that's when lumber was like at its peak. So I was just like, oh, well, we got to do it. Like, I don't want somebody to, I don't want someone to be on the deck and the deck collapse. That's not good. So, what's it going to cost? And that was like a 20 grand expense. And I've just had and I've had a handful of other wonky things come up with that one. So I was just like, and the thing is now it's probably all good. We've probably fixed everything. But like I said, it doesn't really make me all that much money anymore. I can buy an 8-unit further on the outskirts of Madison or in the burbs for not way more, and it will, the rents are higher. So anyways, that one's still one that I'm contemplating selling here at some point. But anyways, so here's in the grand scheme of things. Right now, I'm really confident I could put this on. So let's say I've made nothing on the cash flow if you take all the expenses. I'm just showing like this is probably the worst deal I've bought and how I can still like turn this into a win because I've owned this multiple years. So 5 years later, I'm really confident I can put this on the MLS right now at 625, 650 and make around 100K of profit on it. So, in that regard, I'm doing okay on that. So anyways, that's that one. So that brings me to my long hiatus of buying nothing. And then all of a sudden, one of the agents that I've done a few transactions with calls me up. And so he's an agent and an investor, just like myself. And he calls me up and he says, "Hey, Joff, I got this awesome 8-unit you got to check out." And I was like, "Okay, tell me about it." He gives me the address. And I'm like, I don't know. Like, is that an okay area? Talk to my property manager. He's like, "Oh, I've got some other properties over there. I own a property over there." And he's like, "And these rents are low, Joff." He's like, "You could get these way up." And I said, "Yeah, he's got it on his forecast that, you should be able to get the rents up to, what was it? So the total rents was 7810 at the time. These are 2-bed, 1.5 bath townhouse style with a 1-car attached garage. And I'm just gonna cheat here and use my calculator, but like 7810. So they were averaging about 975 a unit. And he's like, "You wouldn't have to do anything, and you could, raise these up by, probably $50 to $100 a month." And so we were like, "Oh, okay." But then he's like, "If you're willing to put some money into this property, I think I could really crank it up." And we're like, "Okay." So that's when, but anyways, it was in rough shape. The owner, so it was built in the 90s, so it wasn't that old of a property, but the owner just didn't do anything with it. So like the carpets had never been replaced, the kitchens had never been updated, and so as the units got like more and more roughed up, he just, it just wasn't, it wasn't bringing in the best tenants. There was one of the unit that I'll never forget. This guy, he definitely smoked in the unit. Although anytime we brought up, "Oh, your furnace filter's clogged because you're smoking in the unit." I never smoke in here." "Oh yeah, it was the worst smoke. I had to do the smoke remediation at that East Mifflin house. Here, they literally, they pulled the carpet, they did, they did the odor primer, but then on top of it, it still smelled. They had to like do odor primer on the floor before they put the new flooring down. It was that bad. He had 3 pit bulls in there, which like just tore up the joint. So there was a lot of repair that had to be done. But anyways, we converted that whole thing. Oh, I still didn't think I was going to offer on it because I was like, I still don't think these numbers are that good. Because basically what I'm doing is I'm like looking at this and I'm like, okay, so if I raise the rent to this, another weird thing, there was 3 units that just had like one thing on the electric that was for the whole building. And so because of that, he paid the electric bill for that entire unit. I was like, there's got to be a solution to this. We got to be able to get these things off. And so we figured out a way to get them off. And as a result, now I just pay for those common things, and I was able to drop the electric considerably. Also, the water and sewer, we just did what I do at a lot of my other properties, which is you're going to pay for your part. So here it's like we get the water bill, we divide it 8 ways. This is your portion. So we were able to get that off. So anyways, I don't know, all in all, I just thought with, and I should put how much money we knew that was going to cost money to get it there. So all in all, like I was just like, nah, this isn't good enough. Because at this time, every deal I'd ever done was higher than 15% for a cash on cash, which I'm not saying that's a good factor either. I'm just saying that that's what I was looking at it. So I'm flying to Denver for a ski trip. I land and I get a call from the agent. He's like, hey, Joff, you're going to send me that offer later today, right? And I'm like, no. And he's like, well, he's like, I told you about that low ball we had, right? I'm like, yeah. He's like, well, we've been countering back and forth for the last week. I'll tell you what, if you gave us something around, you know, in the low 8s, like even like an 8-10, I think we can probably get this deal done. So then I ran the numbers and I was like, okay, well, this actually makes even more sense for me because I knew how much money, well, I didn't know how much money. I thought I knew how much money I was going to have to spend on this place. And I was just like, well, it makes more sense for me if I go up 10 grand and ask for a 10,000 credit. Plus now I talked to my lender and, I'm a licensed agent. They were offering a 3% commission on the buy side. I took that 3% as a credit. I talked to my lender and said, will you allow me to do this? So now I'm taking, so essentially here's how I've got it. Got my $24K commission as a credit. I've got a 10,000 credit that I built into the offer. And then after inspection, I should have probably asked for a lot more, but I only asked for 2,000 because I was starting to see how the deal was going to come together. So I essentially, had a 36K credit coming to me, but that's not counting some of the other things. So like at closing, you also get the rents. We closed early in the month. So I got the rents for that month. Plus I got the security deposits. Plus I got the tax prorations. So at closing, I brought less than 70K to closing, and the agent on the other side's like, this is nuts that you are getting this 8-unit building and you're bringing a check for under 70 grand. I can't believe that. And in hindsight, that's part of what made this such a good deal. So it was a combination of, negotiating for the, well, I didn't even negotiate. He just basically, he knew where it was going to land. And I know this guy well enough that I bet if I asked him now, how much higher was I than the next offer? And I know there's no way I won this on terms because my terms were not that good. But anyways, but my lessons learned on this one, a knowledgeable property manager can uncover a gem, because now this property is awesome. This is probably the best property I own. I've had other people who missed out on this one contact me and say, hey, I'll buy it for, a lot more than what you bought it for. And I'm like, there's no way. Because now with where the rents are at, it's just, this just but I way overshot. We spent 100K on it just last year. The other thing, we closed on this right before the pandemic. So the plan was, we'll close on this, and then as people's leases come up, we'll just tell them, hey, sorry, we got to renovate your unit. We're going to issue non-renewals. And then, it just didn't work out that way. And then of course, by the time we got to 2021, everything was more expensive. So we ended up spending more money on it, but it doesn't matter. This ended up working out pretty good. It cash flows over 40K a year now, which is pretty awesome. So anyways, but it was very expensive last year. Okay, so then so now it's 2020, summer of 2020, and now we're at that point of the pandemic where it was like, what's going to happen? All the money I planned to spend on Gammon, I didn't because we couldn't. So now And on top of it, if you look at, remember, I didn't buy anything besides Gammon. I didn't buy anything for like 3 years. And during those 3 years, I made the equivalent of 7 years of what I used to make in, so 7 years teaching salary in over the course of 3 years from doing the transition to real estate. So I had, and I'm a saver by nature, so I had money saved up. So and then on top of it, that same agent that did the other side of Gammon Lane got this like pretty interesting deal on the MLS for a 2-unit in Atwood. And I was kind of jealous. And I was like, oh, now I got to do something like that. So basically, and this wasn't my deal, but there's this 2-unit that hit Atwood at like, I don't know, 210, something really, really low. I was so focused on 4 units and up that I remember thinking that and go, either that's a dump or that's a slamming deal. But either way, I'm not going to take the time to find out. Well, he did the smart thing, and he just made it first appointment for the first day that you could see it, and wrote his offer up the night before. He sees it. He starts talking to the tenants. He's like, oh, the tenants aren't paying, so this guy must want to sell because the tenants aren't paying. Okay, I'm going to give him cash, close in 10 days, and no contingencies. And I'm going to go 10K above ask, but I'm only going to give him like a really small deadline. And he did that because the list agent hired for that was very inexperienced, and he knew that because through the conversations they were having, because probably the seller went and found the closest agent or the least expensive agent he could find, which is never a good idea for those of you that aren't real estate agents. So anyways, so of course they bite on it. He accepts it. Then he gets a phone call later that night saying, hey, is there any way we could like sell to somebody else, because some of these other offers came in and they're way higher than yours? He's like, well, how much higher? And he actually tells him 50,000. I'll tell you what, if he writes you a check for 50,000, I'll get out of the way and you can sell it to one of these people. Well, your cash, no inspection, and all this other stuff. He's like, well, then that's what it's going to be. So they end up closing in 10 days. He, within 2 hours, because he just networked during those 10 days, sold it for $50,000 more than what got it under contract, I should say, for $50,000 more than what he just bought it for. So I'm thinking, okay, I got to do something that's good, that's close to that good. So this one on Upham had been on the market for 180 days, and I decide, hey, I'm gonna check this out. I've tried to convince several clients to go see it. All of them were like, oh, that looks like a dump. Like, I'm not gonna go see it. And most of the photos were exterior. There weren't a lot of interior photos. So I go and check it out with my property manager, and we're like, hey, this condition report is terrible. There's a lot of problems, but the units are actually pretty decent. So if we can just fix all the problems, I think we can increase the rents, and we can do something pretty good here. So now it's just a matter of how low can I get this. So they're asking 229, and at that time, had there not been the problems, I think they would have sold this at like 260 had there not been any issues. And they were probably thinking, okay, those 30K of issues, so we'll just sell it for 30K below. So to give you an idea of the issues: vermiculite in the attic, so it had asbestos in the attic. It had a garage roof that was about to collapse. It had standing water in portions of the basement. It had structural issues. It had knob and tube wiring. Trying to think if there's anything else. Yeah, it was not awesome. So it's going to turn away your typical, first-time investor. So here's the cash flow at the asking price, and then basically this is like $10,000 increments down. And I'm like, okay, well, I'm clearly not going to get them down to 190, but let me offer 190 cash, no inspection, and just see if they'll take that, and or what they'll counter back at. And we went back and forth, and eventually we got 204 with me taking the commission as a price reduction at closing, which ended up essentially taking it to 198. I'm rounding a little bit. And so this is the way the deal would have worked had I purchased it. So like, again, the rent was low, plus the garage was underutilized. It was just, they were just keeping a bunch of junk in it. And And I was like, this is a big garage. It was a 1-car garage, but it was wide and there was an upper level. I'm like, somebody would use this for storage or a workshop or something. I could rent this out for at least $100 a month. So in the first year, the rent was pretty low and I had all these expenses. The electrical, I ended up getting separate meters, gas, that I still had to keep paying, obviously. Water, sewer, again, hey, we're gonna split this 50-50 between units. And so that's what it looked like when it wasn't financed. But what I wanted to do was BRRRR this one. So with the BRRRR, that's where you're trying to see if you can pull all of your equity back out and essentially, own the property for nothing. Basically, I was thinking worst case scenario, the assessed value is going to come in at $250, and I'm going to have to keep $28K of that. Well, I should get down to the expenses part. So here's what we initially guessed at. And then once we got like a little bit closer, this is what we were guessing at. And then the actual ended up being about what we initially guessed at, in part because almost everything ended up, we discovered some problems that we didn't plan to discover. And then certain things ended up being more expensive than we expected them to be. So anyways, with that in, $30,000 worth of expenses. So I'm all in on this property at $228. So if the appraisal comes in at $250, I'm going to keep $28K in the deal, which essentially would work out like this. It's making just $1,000 in the first year, and it's making $7,400 in cash flow based on the projection anyway. So then, however, best case scenario, I was hoping for a 285. Then I would be able to pull all of it out, and essentially you can't figure out an ROI because the initial investment is zero because you get all the money back. And well, first year then it actually negatively cash flows, but then for future years it makes just shy of 6,000. So the appraisal did come back at 250, and I was not super satisfied with that. Plus, I didn't have anything to put it into, so I just held on to it. So this is fall of 2020. So like just a few months after I put all this money into the property. Then 2021, the market really starts getting aggressive, and so in February, with a different lender, I said, "Hey, I want an appraisal on this one." And the appraisal comes in at 315 this time. So now, not only do I get all of that money back when I want it, but I get an additional 24K back on top of that, which I use some of that to reinvest in the property. So for example, the upstairs had 1.5 bath, and we changed the half bath into in-unit laundry and put like a new laundry up there. And we were able to really crank the rent up on that one by doing that. So this is essentially how it ends up working out, is I own this property, I got all the money back from it, plus an additional 24K, and it still makes over $6,000 a year. So in the grand scheme of things, now this is even better deal than Gammon Ln. It doesn't make me a lot of money, but I essentially got paid to own this place because I got all my money back. So anyways, lessons learned on that. If you have the funds, the knowledge, at that point, it starts to become a game. But this is something, this is year 9 of doing this, not year 1, 2, or 3. And I was in a much better financial position for that as well. So that starts to tie into, hope I didn't lose it, Valley Street. So this is an 8-unit in Cross Plains. Basically, the seller reached out to me for an evaluation on the property. There was no comps, so I really struggled to give an evaluation on it. Initially, I was like, I don't know, like I might personally buy it for like, $525 and not take a commission. And he seemed warm to that idea, but not certain. I said, of course I could list it. Then you'll see what it's really worth, because you never know until you list it. And he's just, I kept following up with him. Anyways, fast forward and, oh, let me take a half step back. When I did that appraisal on Upham, when that came in as high as it did, I decided that my East Mifflin places, I was going to appraise those out too. Because I'm like, okay, I bought these at 300. I know if I sold them today, I could get over 400 for them. And when I had the original debt on them was only like, well, 240, because that's 80% of 300. So I had about 240K of debt on those. Now I've only got about 190K of debt on those. Like I've got some money in those. So I had appraisals done on those, and basically I could do those cash out refinances like that on really short notice. And so now this Valley Street, I keep following up with the seller. Hey, do you want me to list it? When do you want me to list it? And then he tells me he has an offer at 550, directly from an investor, no commission. And I'm like, you can't take that. Like if I list this, and I'm so focused on the listing at this point, because, well, one, I learned it's in a floodplain now. I forgot to put that. I learned that after kind of giving him a verbal offer of 525. So it's in a floodplain. So now I'm less interested in it. But then I hear that the neighbors, there's 2 8 units right next to it. It's all houses everywhere else. So there's these 3 8 units right next to each other in a very residential area. I find out that the neighbors are trying to sell for I think it was like 650 each. And I was like, hey, your neighbors are trying to get, they won't get 650. They're going to be trying to sell that forever. And I'm like, well, still, if they even think they can get 650, they're probably not way off. They could probably get at least 6. So I'm thinking, okay, if I take this 550, no commission, I'm still getting a pretty decent deal on it. And so in order to make it slightly better than the other offer, I offered to pay his closing costs on top of it. So that's essentially what I ended up getting it for, is 550 plus a couple grand in closing costs. And we got that accepted. And at the time I was like, oh, hopefully I got a good deal. And then only to find out a couple months later that those 2 next to me they were trying to get 650, they ended up getting 700 a piece for those. So now I'm like, holy crap. Like, well, then on top of it, it was very under rented. You see the rents right down here. We were really confident we could just simply raise the rents. Now there was 1 unit where there was a smoker, so we had to mitigate the smoke and put $10,000 into that unit for replacing the flooring, repainting. We put new stainless steel appliances in, but by doing that, we really cranked up the rent. And so, anyways, but the only reason I was able to make that cash offer, and that was the only way you would take it too, cash, no inspection, is because of all of those. So I was able to pull out 130K out of one property, 140K out of another property, the 252K out of, so here's $522,000 worth of just pulling money out of other properties. So it wasn't like money out of my pocket. I just pulled them out of other properties, then $30,000 of my own savings, and now I'm buying this place. And here's, because just good timing, good networking, and everything else. And who would have known that the neighbors were actually going to get that much? I never could have predicted that. I just had this one appraised recently, and the appraisal came out at 740. So I essentially bird this because now I can, if I want to, I can take a cash out refinance, or I can take a HELOC for more than the 550 that I initially purchased it at, and still own the property. So anyways, so now all of a sudden this one is probably even a little bit better deal than the Upham one. But again, I get, my first year I couldn't have done this, and even if I would have found this guy, networked, he was looking for cash, no inspection, and so far there hasn't been any major issues. So all in all, this is what the total portfolio looks like now. Some of these rents got up a lot higher than I expected them to get. This is kind of what everything looks like now. So anyways, I was going to kind of go into this a little bit here too, but I know we're running pretty close to the end here. So I'll try to keep this short, but essentially this is just how I analyze deals now. This Todd Drive list, this is actually a listing that I have that's coming up pretty soon. There's one vacant unit And then there's the other side that's being rented at 805. If you get the vacant side, well, it's not vacant yet, but it will be by the time we list. Getting the vacant side up to 2,400, so obviously it's going to lose money if you have a vacant side. So you get the vacant side up, and then it's still not cash flowing. But if you get the other side, you wait for the other one to become due at the end of the summer, and you get them both up to market. Now it's a 4,000 cash flow, or 1,300 there. Now, if you want to be more aggressive with the rents, and people are increasing the rents by quite a bit, obviously you could make those numbers a little bit better. On the same side, now you got to look at it from a potential owner-occupant side. So I got it in here. I run this a little bit different now. So this is what it looks like when I analyze for somebody who's looking to owner-occupy a duplex. So now I've got to put in what the rent is, what the vacant side is going to be, and then still put in all the expenses. And then, essentially what is your expense? So now to have this 3-bed, 3-bath and rent out the 2-bed, 1-bath next to you, now you are, you're getting, you are paying $1,650 for that. Now, if you moved out, it would be negatively cash flowing, so that doesn't work. So then, okay, well, what if we get the rent up on that other side? Okay, now if you get the rent up on the other side, that's your per month if you live in it, and now it does positively cash flow, whether you manage it or have a property manager. And then what if you flip-flopped it? What if you lived in the smaller part? Well, that doesn't change the cash flow if you moved out, but that does change how much you're, so if you lived in the 2-bed, 1-bath, that person would be paying $866 a month, essentially. Now going back to that first spreadsheet, here's off-market things that I know about. So this is an 8-unit in the upper burbs. This is what the seller wants, at least what that they say they want. And then just here's like what I've got in for expenses. So this one, if self-managed, makes a decent amount of money. With property management, doesn't make that much money. Here's a 6-unit in downtown Madison that is on my radar, but they just want way too much. This just doesn't make sense. This is a brick 4-unit in downtown. But it all depends, because let's take this brick 4-unit, 5,400, so $5,400 a month divided by 4. So he's only getting $1,350. I did that math pretty quick, so hopefully I didn't type it in wrong. But if he's getting $1,350 a month for 2-bed, 1-bath, in a nice neighborhood in downtown, well, what if he got that up to $1,500 times 4? So now let's take this, and this is exactly kind of how I look at these. So okay, now he's up to 6,000. But he's also got 3 garage stalls in the back. What if he also rented each of those out for an additional $100 a month? So now we're up to 63. So now what does it look like? Okay, so it looks terrible here if you look at it the way it is. But now you start looking at it this way, and it's better. It's better, but still, like I said, this isn't a spot where I would buy into. But the way you also got to look at it is the thing that we haven't talked about a ton, but we've hinted on, is the appreciation. So some people would say, you know what, I'm going to buy this property because it is going to make money. And I think in 5 years, this is $1 million property. It's a brick 4-unit in a really desirable neighborhood in downtown Madison, and it's got garage parking. Like this is going to be worth a lot more. So some people really, and typically when you buy in and around downtown, it is getting to the point now where people are buying for the appreciation because they just believe, and I haven't seen anybody be incorrect that the property is just certainly just going to be worth more. So anyway, I'm going to go back to my slides, and then again, a lot of people say all the good deals are done, they're gone. They don't exist. So 911 Delaplaine, that was a long time ago. The East Mifflin places, those are both expired listings. East Main, that was on market. Wilson, that was on market. Gammon Ln, that was a pocket listing. You used to be able to do those, now you can't. But so many agents knew about that it might as well have been on the market. The day I saw it, I saw probably close to 20 agents like either see it right before me, with me, or in the next group after me. So there's quite a few people that saw that. Upham Street, that was on the market for almost a half year, and then Valley Street, that was off market. So so lessons learned early on. I should have hired an agent. Also, and I didn't really talk about that. I talked about it a lot more in the last class. I should have house hacked. I should not have bought a condo. I should have bought a duplex or a 4-unit and house hacked. I could have really accelerated the growth. And of course, down the road, I should have hired probably a property manager once I got to that 4th property. I was in over my head, and not doing that probably stopped me from buying other properties. And then at all times, if make the offer, do the beat the price drop if you think it's overpriced. Be educated, know your options, and don't hesitate. So the insider tips, I'll say this, I said this the last time, I'll say it again. There's no smoking gun. This isn't rocket science. There's no for sure certain you should buy this, or it depends on the situation. Don't wait to buy real estate. Buy real estate and wait. Usually it's going to work out, because if you saw those early examples, I wasn't even factoring in everything that I should have been, and it still all worked out pretty good. Have an open mind. There is no perfect deal. Be prepared, and typically being an expert in one thing is better than trying to go around and be a jack of all trades. And then of course, take action. And so here's some action steps for first-time investors. You can interview and hire a real estate agent or team that has experience with investment real estate. You can talk to a lender and discuss options and see, what that would look like if you were to purchase a rental property. You can get an MLS search set up for you that fits your price range in your area and start looking at upcoming listings. You can start analyzing properties and having discussions with your agent. And here's what I say. All of these are free of cost, with the caveat though, if all you're doing is asking questions for weeks on end, you might wear out your agent. So, but that, so just make sure you're doing your part too, educate yourself. And so recommended books, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, which I have right here, and The Millionaire Real Estate Investor, which I have right here, and Bigger Pockets, which is a podcast, but one of the hosts, or one of the former hosts, because now he's taking a little bit of a hiatus, Brandon Turner, I've got his book right here. These will be drawn in a little bit. That's why you have to fill out your surveys and hand those in here before heading out, but these are the door prizes. You got a shot at winning for filling that survey out, so please start doing that. And what questions do you have for me? Anything else you'd like to know? Yes.
Actually, I have a bunch of them, and I'll catch you after. But one question, the first question I came to mind is tenants. But we talked a couple times about the issues with tenants. There was one or two things that are key to vetting tenants. What would that be? How do you deal with delinquency and payments?
So how do you deal with bad tenants? How do you deal with delinquent paying tenants? So I'd say most of the tenants I've had have been average. Actually, I'd say that's what I'd say. Most of the tenants have been average. You rarely hear from them. They probably call you about a problem a month after they probably should have. They're trying not to bother you. They pay on time and they're fine. And then you have some tenants that are awesome. Like they care about the property almost as much as you. They're really respectful. They're awesome. They're really fun to work with. And you're glad that you have them, and you're sad to see them move out. And then yes, there is a percentage of tenants that are just very difficult to deal with. Not paying is really rare. So prior to the pandemic, I only had 2 groups that ever had difficulty with payment. my third year of Delaplaine, maybe it was my second year of Delaplaine, I had one of the 4 tenants that was paying, but his checks were bouncing. Not all year. It was like about halfway through the year. And finally, I just and then he stopped getting back to me. And so basically, I called a meeting with these guys. I had a really good rapport with these guys, and I basically called a meeting and just said, "Hey, you know, this can't keep happening, and this is going to affect everybody if this doesn't get fixed." And essentially, what they did is they all agreed that he should find a sublet. We were going to find a sublet to take his spot, and that he was going to get caught up on. We were going to give him, I can't remember what it was. Like we were going to give him another month to come up with the money that he'd been short. And then from then on, I changed my method to, instead of like, if I've got 4 tenants, I'll take 4 checks, to I'm just going to have one person write me the check, and then that's it. And that kind of solved that problem. Now, here's the thing. There's actually systems online that that can really help you. And then, of course, if you hire property management, they already have the system. But yeah, I should have utilized the systems. There's different free software programs out there that I could have utilized that I didn't. So so that was one. The other one is when I bought into that East Main. Remember, they had the eviction notice, but then they got caught up, and then now I'm taking it over, and they were fine for a couple months, but then all of a sudden, the check didn't come in, and I kept asking them, and never came in, and so then eventually I just talked to those guys and said, what's the scoop? And they're like, we're kind of in this financial hardship situation. I can move back with my family. I can move back with my family. I can move in with a friend. Whatever. And I was just like, you know what? Let's just end it right here. Like, if you will sign this saying that your lease ends at the end of this month, and I'll agree to give you your security deposit back minus damages. And they were like, okay. And so I gave them. They didn't have a huge security deposit either. I still gave them a decent amount back. They were satisfied with that, and they moved along. It allowed me to renovate the unit and get a better tenant in there. Because I already had someone that wanted to move in before their lease ended. So now I just called up that person. Hey, you said you wanted to move in July. Guess what? I'm going to have this place ready for you by July 1st. She's like, great. Signed the lease. I had a way better tenant that was paying more. And I basically got to do what I wanted to do with that property anyway. So it worked out okay with that group. During the pandemic, I had 3 out of 17 groups that were unable to pay. Fortunately, I had a property manager who was amazing, and we had a game plan in advance of like how we were going to handle the situation. Well, let's not be jerks and tell people you better pay or we're going to get rid of you, because that worked out really well, because the landlords that did that, like as soon as the tenants found out they didn't have to pay, were like, like that's what you said, but now we're not going to pay. We were just like being really real with them and said, hey, here's the reality. At the end of the month, or at the beginning of every month, we've still got to pay the lender. And if we can't make that payment, eventually we're not going to be the owner anymore. And we're not going to be the ones dealing with you. And we're willing to work with you. Can you pay half? Can you pay a quarter? Like what can you pay? And we'll figure out. And then as soon as like the different kind of rent catch-up programs came out, we were, my property manager was literally bringing it to the door, sign here and your rent's going to be covered, and so that was really good. But as far as rental criteria, man, I was not awesome at that. I mean, that's probably part of the reason that I eventually hired a property manager, is because like every once in a while, and even if they did pay on time, and like sometimes I just had tenants where I was like, oh, these guys are kind of a pain, like the tenant that you liked was complaining about them. Well, I don't, that's not fun. So, but yeah, that's part of the reason, the property manager, they hold a higher bar. Well, at least mine held a higher bar than I did, because I just didn't have really awesome criteria. But yeah, that's what I could say about tenants. Like I said, the vast majority, say like probably 75, 80% of your tenants are going to be average. they're fine. They're not awesome. They're not terrible. They're fine. You know, so any other? Yeah.
So in that vein, is there a pretty good emotional, so I know a part matter is managing your stuff, is there a pretty good emotional gap there too, where you're like, hey, talk to Joe?
Oh,
That's not my-
so now it's to the point that my wife and I joke because she wants to get into this now, and because she's like, I think I, and we've already got all of her LLCs. Like tenants never call me LLC. You know, never gonna see it LLC. Like, you know, that she'll never actually see the physical property LLC. I mean, I don't think that's a good idea, but she'd probably have me go do it. I do say in my other one of the things you should do, even after hiring property management, is still at least twice a year, go out to the property and see every space that you can, exterior, and, you know, if there's common inside space, or if you have an excuse to get into the property for whatever reason, to actually scope out the property a little bit. Because there's certain things tenants won't complain about, even your best tenants won't complain about, that you as a property owner should be aware of. So like if there's a chunk of, you know, siding off the back of the house that's falling off, or if there's if the tree has grown to the point where now it's rubbing against the roof and it needs to be trimmed back, that's the kind of thing a tenant's not noticing. They're not looking at. And the property manager, I mean, they're usually coming out, fix the problem, and leaving. They're not always paying attention to that either. So, you know, you have to stay up on that. I don't know. Did that answer your question, or?
I mean, I was asking, like, if you found it helpful, where you don't have to worry. You still want to check on stuff, but you don't have to. Like, you don't have to worry about.
Yeah, it's to the point now. Unless the tenant has been there a very long time, you know, like prior to 2020, I don't know who the tenants are anymore. So most of my tenants, I don't know who they are anymore, unless I signed them like several years ago. Any? Yeah. Any other questions while we're taking surveys? And
I got one more quick
yeah.
question. There's been a ton of new construction downtown.
Yes.
Construction. Are you ever concerned about getting too saturated down there? How do you keep your footprint pulse of the supply of demand?
It's tough. So for a little bit, I felt like it was killing me because there was several years where I didn't raise rents. But now it's gotten to the point where the product I have is limited quantity. So like if you want brand new, you want a gym, you want, you know, you want like all, you know, if those are the features you're looking for, I can't offer that. So I'm not going to try to compete with that. So, but what I have is, I have a backyard. I put a fire pit out back that they can use on a, you know, summer or fall night. You know, I allow medium-sized dogs. You know, so like if you have a pet, you probably can't get into one of those new apartments. Maybe if you have a cat, but if you have a small or medium-sized dog, you're not getting in some of those new apartments. So I'm offering something very different. And so yeah, for the same price as a brand new 1-bed, 1-bath with really nice amenities, you can get a 3-bed, 1-bath for me with a backyard and the ability to have your dog and those types of things. So yeah, at one point I felt like it was crushing me, and now I feel like I've kind of got my own market. Oh, and I see I've got some questions here too. Let's see here. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I just had a question. That
Yeah.
spreadsheet template, 2 things. It's really amazing.
Oh, thank you.
And if there's any
I've
way to,
definitely
like,
seen more
share a
advanced
template-
versions of that. I actually get critiques sometimes from you know, other, like, this is all that goes into this. I'm like, yeah, like I keep it simple.
Yeah.
It's still a lot more than what I used to consider when I first started.
And
But
then-
yeah, what's your question?
So, well, first, can you share a template with the attendees just so?
Yeah, Yeah, I can
we
do that.
Tweak it the way we
Once
want.
it'll be a little bit because I'll probably wait until we have the YouTube link, so it might be a
Okay.
week or two. But yeah, I'll
Okay.
also share the template with everybody.
And then some advice, just from, I've been working with some buyers since this fall that are interested in purchasing multi-unit properties and he's, I mean, the husband, he's a numbers whiz, but I think he needs a push, to look past like making a profit on his very first property. So do you have any advice?
Well, I mean, like I said, just really focus on those initial 2 criteria. Does
Yeah.
it cash flow or have the ability to cash flow on the next rent cycle? If yes, then it's a possibility.
Okay.
Then secondly, is there any foreseeable issues? And remember, you get an you're probably going to get an inspection too.
Yeah, exactly.
So is there initially any foreseeable issues that would take you out of the game, in the first 1 or 2 years?
Yeah.
And if you don't find that by you looking at it, and if you don't find that on the inspection, then you're in pretty good shape.
Cool. Okay. Thank you.
All right. Any other questions? All right, Ian, bring it up. Let's, so whoever's drawn third, you won't get a choice, but the first, okay, so we will do this here. All right, and we got Garrett. What do you want? You get pick. Yeah, you get your choice. All right. Awesome. All right. Mark. Which one?
The rental property.
All right.
I already have the other one. Thank you.
All right. So we'll go to this one. And let's see what we got. Rob. Is he still here? Yeah. All right, Rob. In my opinion, this is a really quick read. My wife, who was not into investment real estate at all, I got a couple extra copies of that at home. And I was like, hey, I just got an extra copy of this. You should read it. We were out like on our patio one day. She read the whole thing that afternoon. And then afterwards said, okay, I think I'm going to buy a rental property at some point. So I love Rich Dad, Poor Dad because it's such an easy read and it's very motivational. The Millionaire Real Estate Investor I think has all of the tools in there. It's a drier read. But it has all the actual tools. So like Rich Dad, Poor Dad is for the motivation. That one is for the tools. And then Brandon Turner's book is a nice kind of in between. He gives some very good information, and then on the flip side, he has some really relatable stories as well. So all 3 of those books I would highly recommend to anybody who's getting started. So thanks so much for coming in, everybody. Really appreciate it.